Hey, in this lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can add a new promise to our project. And this new promise will allow us to run some code after specific conditions have been met. So in this case, right now, the way that our project works is that we're outputting the planets and we're making a fetch request. So we're only getting that one URL. But ideally, we want to continue to loop through until there's no more next, and get rid of the next button entirely, and then pull back all of the data, so all 61 results, into one object, and then send that object into output planets instead of having it with the next button and we've got all of these results being found. So that's ideally what we want to do, and this lesson will walk you through how to accomplish that. So returning back all the results from the array without having to loop through and getting next, next, next. We're going to get everything within one array object. And we're going to use promises in order to accomplish that. So what promises do, and there's a great article and information, of course, at Mozilla Developer Network. So promise represents the eventual completion or failure of asynchronous operation resulting in a value. So what's happening here is that we're setting up a new promise and we're creating that new promise object. And what happens is that once this promise resolves, we're sending back value of foo, and it's expecting that foo to be sent in. So once promise 1 is resolved, then, and that's where that keyword then, so just like fetch, then is used in the same way because fetch is promise based. So the idea of the promises is the same concept here, where we're getting then and we're getting that value of foo being passed in under value, and we're console logging out the value, and then console log is logging out promise 1. So that's the promise object that gets logged out. And that is actually not where the data gets returned, but we get this promise pending and then resolved, and then we get the value of foo. So we get that promise status there. So right now it's pending, and then it gets resolved, and we get a promise value being passed in there. So same idea as what we're using with fetch, and let's try that out in our project. So it looks like we have another opportunity to add in the promise into our project and updating this. So instead of fetch data, let's call this fetch all. We're going to pass in the URL, and we're going to add in a promise here where we've got then being returned back and function, and then it's returning back a value. So just like foo was being returned back over here, we're going to also do that and we'll call this planets as well, as we're going to be expecting a value or an object called planets, and then console log this planets. Next, we need to create the function in order to accommodate the fetch all. So call this fetch all, and it's going to be expecting some parameters, and for now we'll just take in the URL. So what we want to do is we want to return back a promise, because otherwise it's not going to work. It's not going to just work with a return, because what we need to do is set up a new promise and then resolve that and send that back. So we can actually copy and paste the information from here and do a return, adding in the new promise. So this will actually return back foo as the value of planets. So you can see now that's being written, and we just need to update this in order to handle our proper response, and that's going to be making the fetch request and looping through until we've got all of the information. Similar to what we did in fetch data, where we had the option for the next button. In this case, we're going to handle that, and we're going to continue to go next until there's no more results. And then we're going to return back all of the values. So instead of just resolving foo, we're going to return back the array of planets, and then we can finally take the planets and pass them into output planets and see them visibly being returned. So this is all going to happen with the promises. So that's coming up next, where we're going to do part 2 to adding in the promise. Before we conclude this lesson, try it out. Add in the ability to have the function and then a promise after that, creating a new promise on the return so that we can invoke then when the promise is ready to be fulfilled.